Imagine designing a perfectly functional parachute,
Yeah.
like 500 years before the airplane was even invented.
Right, just completely ahead of his time.
Exactly. And now imagine that same mind just, abandoning that world-changing science to go paint a mural that started crumbling before it was even finished.
It's wild. It really is.
It is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a super fascinating stack of material you've brought in for us today. We've got chronological timelines, architectural and biographical analyses, and even this incredibly detailed translated Russian historical deep dive into the Renaissance.
Yeah, it's a brilliant collection, and I think it gives us a truly multidimensional look at a figure we all sort of think we know, right? But we rarely actually understand him.
And that is exactly our mission today. We are going to look way past the absolute cliche of the Mona Lisa to uncover the real Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, I'm so ready for this.
Yeah, we're going to explore how a boy with a very unconventional background used just raw, obsessive curiosity to become this universal genius, and why his greatest contributions to humanity might actually be the things he chose not to share.
I mean, it's really a story about the dawn of the scientific revolution, but driven by a mind that was entirely unrestrained by the boundaries of its time.
Right, so let's start right at the beginning. It's 1452 in a little town called Vinci near Florence. His father, Ser Piero, is this wealthy notary.
Yes.
But his mother, Caterina, is a peasant woman. She was possibly a tavern servant. So Leonardo is born illegitimate.
Which, if you know anything about the rigid social structure of the 15th century, illegitimacy was this enormous, heavily stigmatized label.
Yeah, massive. But looking at how his life actually played out, being an outcast was weirdly his biggest advantage.
Precisely. Because had he been a legitimate son, the societal expectations would have strictly forced him to follow in his father's footsteps.
He would have been stuck at a desk.
Exactly. He would have been chained to a desk, forced into this really tedious bureaucratic profession of drafting legal contracts all day. But because those doors were firmly closed to him, he was completely free from that expectation.
I mean, if you've ever felt that intense family pressure to go to law school or take over a family business, you can probably imagine the relief.
Oh, definitely.
Because he was locked out of the respectable path, he basically got to be this ultimate free-range kid. His grandfather and uncle essentially just let him roam the fields and vineyards.
And that unstructured time out in nature, that is what birthed his defining characteristic, this relentless, almost ravenous observational skill.
Yeah.
He wasn't sitting at a desk memorizing Latin syntax. He was out watching how water flowed around stones in a stream, or, how a dragonfly manipulated its wings to hover.
Which actually leads to one of the wildest stories from our sources, from Vasari's classic biographical accounts. So Leonardo's father asks him to decorate a wooden shield.
Right, a fairly standard request for the time.
Sure, a normal teenager might paint like a family crest or a nice floral pattern, not Leonardo. He decides to paint this terrifying winged monster.
And this is where his obsession with observation kicks in.
Yeah. To figure out exactly how a monster would look, he starts hoarding dead animals in his bedroom. We're talking lizards, grasshoppers, snakes, crickets.
He's intensely focused on studying the anatomy of these real creatures so he can composite them into his fictional monster.
Right.
And he is so obsessed with the visual truth of it that he completely ignores the fact that these specimens are, rapidly rotting in his room.
He is literally sitting in a room reeking of decaying reptiles, totally unbothered, just painting away.
Just another day for him.
And the painting is so incredibly viscerally realistic that his father takes one look at it, gets entirely spooked, and sells the smelly shield to some merchants for 100 ducats.
Yep.
And then those merchants turn around and flip it to the Duke of Milan for 300 ducats.
It's amazing. And it perfectly encapsulates his lifelong method. He combined this boundless, eccentric imagination with brutal, hyper-realistic observation.
Right.
And that exact talent is what fast-tracked him into the Florentine workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio.
Which puts him right into the beating heart of the Medici-funded Renaissance. And, if you picture a Renaissance workshop, you might think it's just a bunch of guys quietly painting on easels.
Oh, not at all. Not even close.
Yeah.
The Medici family's wealth created this environment where art, science, and industry were all deeply intertwined. In Verrocchio's workshop, Leonardo was learning metallurgy, chemistry, carving, structural engineering.
They were doing a bit of everything.
Exactly. They were building parade floats and casting bronze bells just as often as they were painting portraits. It was a completely multidisciplinary education.
And he clearly outgrew it fast.
Yeah.
Our sources mention the story of them working together on a painting called The Baptism of Christ. Leonardo is tasked with painting just one angel on the side.
Just one little angel.
Right. And he paints this angel with such incredible depth and atmospheric realism that, according to the legend anyway, his master Verrocchio takes one look at it and vows to never pick up a brush again.
He was completely eclipsed by his own teenage student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that frustration with the limitations of a standard canvas, that's exactly what drove him out of Florence and toward Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan.
Yes, his big career move.
But when he pitches himself for a job, he doesn't lead with his artistic portfolio. We have this sprawling letter he wrote to the Duke, and it reads like a manifesto for a military mastermind.
It really does.
He promises light portable bridges, multi-barreled cannons that hail stones, armored wagons that can break through enemy lines, and silent secret underground passages.
All these incredible war machines.
And then, literally at the very bottom, he just adds a quick note that in times of peace, he can also paint and sculpt.
It's such a profound insight into his self-image.
But it's also incredibly bizarre. I mean, think about applying for a top-tier mechanical engineering job at NASA, and at the bottom of your resume, you just write, also available for interpretive dance.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like, why bury the lead on the one thing he had actually proven he was a genius at?
Well, because he viewed his art as a secondary trade. To him, it was a means to an end, a way to fund his true passion, which was understanding the mechanics of the universe.
The engineering was the real work.
Exactly. To him, the engineering was the real work. And to make that job interview even stranger, when he actually arrives in Milan, he shows up playing a musical instrument he built himself.
Oh, right, the lyre.
Yes, a lyre made of silver and gold, shaped exactly like a horse's head.
So extra.
Very extra. He presented himself as a musician, a conversationalist, an entertainer, and once he got the job, his primary role initially wasn't even building those armored tanks. He was working as a theatrical designer.
Oh, okay.
He created these massive scenographic arrangements for court parties at the Palazzo Sforza.
Like the Feast of Paradise, right? Where he built a stage with 7 turning mechanical planets for a wedding. It was basically a 15th century Super Bowl halftime show.
That's exactly what it was. But the theater was really his secret research and development lab.
How so?
Because in a theater setting, you're constantly tasked with creating illusions, making props appear to move on their own, making actors fly. The theater gave him a royal budget and a practical excuse to experiment endlessly with gears, pulleys, springs, and counterweights.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
For one play, he even built a mechanical bird that actually flapped its wooden wings.
And that playful stage experimentation is what sparked his absolute obsession with real human flight. He drafts this aerial screw that is conceptually the blueprint for a modern helicopter, complete with his invention of ball bearings to reduce the friction.
Which is just mind-blowing.
It is. And then there is the parachute. He designs a pyramid-shaped parachute out of linen cloth in 1485. And for centuries, historians looked at that sketch and thought, that heavy, rigid thing would never work.
Right, it looks too clunky.
But in the year 2000, a skydiver actually built it exactly to Leonardo's specs and jumped from 3,000 meters.
And it worked flawlessly.
Flawlessly.
The skydiver even reported that the descent was smoother and had less structural flutter than a modern parachute.
He essentially peered 500 years into the future. But, there's this massive paradox to all this engineering.
Oh, definitely.
We just talked about him designing these brutal weapons of war, armored tanks, multi-barreled cannons designed to shred infantry. But if you look at the accounts of his personal life, this is a man who was incredibly, almost radically gentle.
Extremely gentle. I mean, he was a strict vegetarian, which was virtually unheard of in the 15th century.
Yeah, that's really rare for the time.
Very rare. He genuinely believed that animals felt pain and suffered just like humans, and he structured his whole life around minimizing that harm.
He wouldn't even wear leather. He wore linen because he was repulsed by the idea of wearing a dead animal. There are even accounts of him walking through the Florence markets, buying caged birds from the vendors, and immediately opening the cages just to set them free.
Just to let them go.
Yeah. So how does a vegetarian pacifist reconcile spending his days meticulously designing a heavily armored, turtle-like tank meant to crush human beings on a battlefield?
Well, it requires understanding the mechanistic vision of the Renaissance mind.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
To Leonardo, the entire universe was one interconnected machine. The movement of the planets, the flow of water, the anatomy of a bird, and the gears of a tank. They were all governed by the exact same iron laws of physics.
So he's looking at military engineering the exact same way he looked at the theater gears. It's just a complex system of pulleys, levers, and applied force.
Exactly. He was captivated by the pure mechanics of power and friction. When he was designing a tank, he wasn't really thinking about the bloodshed. He was solving a complex equation of weight, force, and mobility. His intellect was utterly obsessed with the how. He wanted to see if the machine could be realized, even if his soul revolted against the actual application of those mechanics in warfare.
That inner friction is so fascinating. And honestly, this obsession with experimenting and tweaking the mechanics of everything frequently ruined his actual artistic commissions.
Oh, it led to some of the most heartbreaking failures in art history.
Like the bronze horse.
Yes, Sforza horse.
He spends years obsessing over this massive monumental equestrian statue for the Duke. He designs a 66-ton bronze horse, making endless calculations to get the equine anatomy perfectly lifelike. He finally finishes the massive clay model.
And then?
Then in 1394, the French invade. And all 66 tons of his precious, carefully allocated bronze are confiscated and melted down into cannons to defend the city.
Years of his life, his grandest artistic vision, literally melted down to fuel the very warfare he privately despised.
It's tragic. And when it wasn't geopolitical bad luck, he was sabotaging himself. Take the Last Supper.
Oh, a perfect example.
It's one of those famous paintings on Earth. But it was basically a technical disaster from day one. He hated traditional fresco painting. The fresco, you have to apply water-based pigment to a wet plaster. You have to paint incredibly fast before it dries. You can't hesitate, and you definitely can't revise.
And Leonardo loved nothing more than to revise.
Exactly.
He needed time to think, to let the characters breathe. So he experimented. He decided to paint on a dry wall using this experimental mix of oil and tempera paints. He thought this would allow him to take his time and build up luminous layers over months.
The problem is oil and a dry, damp-prone refractory wall do not mix.
They really don't.
The result, the painting started flaking off within 20 years. It was ruined almost immediately. And its subsequent history is just tragic. French soldiers later used the room as a stable and actually threw rocks at the apostles.
That hurts to even hear.
Right. And then during World War II, an Allied bomb hit the building, and the painting only survived because local friars had stacked sandbags against it. What we see today is essentially a heavily restored ghost of his original work.
Yeah, the tragedy of the Last Supper is a direct result of his inability to just accept a standard, proven method. His relentless need to innovate was a double-edged sword.
Truly.
And ultimately, frustrated by these static limitations of art and the repeated failures of these massive commissions, he shifts his mechanical obsession inward. He turns his focus to what he considered the ultimate perfect machine.
The human body. And this is where the historical record reads a bit like a Gothic horror novel. He gains access to the basement of the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital in Florence. Over his lifetime, he dissects more than 30 human bodies.
Wow.
Often these were executed criminals or people who died destitute with no family to claim them.
You really have to picture the reality of this. It was arduous, dangerous, and deeply taboo work. There was no refrigeration. He was working by candlelight in a damp basement. The smell, the risk of infection, it was gruesome.
Yeah, but his desire to understand the mechanics of life was stronger than his physical revulsion.
Definitely. And he wasn't just looking. He was doing cutting-edge medical mapping. He mapped the veins, muscles, tendons, and nerves.
He even invented a technique where he injected hot wax into the internal cavities of a human brain so he could make a perfect three-dimensional cast of its shape once the wax cooled.
Which is incredible.
Doctors wouldn't repeat that specific technique for another 200 years.
But his observations of the heart are where his true genius for connecting different disciplines really shines. He was fascinated by how the heart valves closed.
Oh, this is where his observations of nature bleed into his anatomy, right?
Precisely. Because he had spent thousands of hours observing the flow of rivers and how water curls into vortices when it hits an obstacle, he applied that fluid dynamics knowledge to blood.
That's wild.
He theorized that as blood is pumped through the aortic valve, it creates a vortex, a swirling eddy that physically pushes the valve leaflets closed from the top down. He mapped this exact flow with astonishing precision.
And the craziest part of this is that modern cardiology didn't fully validate his specific fluid dynamic theories of the aortic valve until 2014.
2014.
Using modern MRI technology, They realized Leonardo was exactly right. It's like someone inventing the smartphone in the 1500s, writing down exactly how it works, and then just tossing the blueprints into a desk drawer and completely forgetting about it.
And that is the immense tragedy of Leonardo da Vinci. He didn't just want to hide this knowledge, he fully intended to publish all of this.
He did.
Yes. He was preparing a massive treatise on anatomy called De Figura Humana, aiming to publish it in the winter of 1510. But he was such a perfectionist, so he kept delaying.
Of course he did.
Then, in 1513, while working in Rome, rumors started swirling. He was accused of improper practices regarding his dissections. The ecclesiastical pressure mounted, and the Pope essentially barred him from further anatomical research.
Wow. So he moves to France a few years later and dies without ever releasing this knowledge to the world.
Right. And because he never published, human medical advancement was quite literally set back by centuries. Imagine if the medical community in the 1500s had access to 20th century cardiovascular mapping. The trajectory of human health, surgery, and medicine would have been fundamentally altered.
Instead, all we get are his notebooks.
Oh, yeah.
He left behind 13,000 pages of notes, and about 7,000 survive today. Now, this is actually a great moment to quickly debunk a massive myth from our sources.
Oh, the code.
Yes. If you've ever heard of Leonardo, you've probably heard about his secret code, how he supposedly wrote everything in mirror writing to hide his genius, heretical ideas from spies in the church.
The famous mirror writing. It is a very romantic, cinematic idea, but the truth is wonderfully practical.
Oh, so practical.
Leonardo was simply left-handed.
Exactly. Think about writing with a quill and wet ink in the 1500s. Ink took a long time to dry. If you were left-handed and you write from left to right, your hand drags right across the fresh ink and smudges your entire page.
So frustrating.
Right. So to avoid ruining his meticulous anatomical drawings and notes, he just taught himself to write from right to left. It wasn't a Da Vinci Code. He just didn't want to smudge his homework.
It is the ultimate pragmatic solution from a highly practical engineer. Yet the content of those unsmudged pages is invaluable.
Literally invaluable.
Right.
Bill Gates bought a single 36-page notebook of Leonardo's The Codex Leicester for over $30 million.
Unbelievable.
And honestly, the best part of these notebooks aren't just the grand inventions. It's his weekly to-do lists.
Oh, I love his to-do lists.
They're the best. He wrote down the things he needed to figure out before the week was over. They feature bullet points like, why is the sky blue? And describe how a woodpecker's tongue is structured.
Most of us stop asking those fundamental why questions when we're like 7 years old. We just accept that the sky is blue. Leonardo at 50 was still passionately demanding to know the structural mechanics of a woodpecker's tongue.
Which brings up a really fascinating contradiction.
Right.
We have a guy who built failed tanks, painted murals that flaked off the wall, and kept his world changing, centuries ahead of its time, science locked in a drawer. If his science was entirely lost to his contemporaries, why is he remembered today primarily as the ultimate artistic icon?
Well, because the art that he did manage to finish fundamentally changed the rules of engagement for painting. Take his portraits. He introduced the concept of the opposite, which we often call torsion.
Okay, explain how that actually works in practice.
Before Leonardo, medieval and early Renaissance portraits were rigid. They were either perfectly straight on or a harsh, flat profile, like a face on a coin.
Right, very stiff.
Very static. Leonardo realized that human beings don't actually move like that.
Yeah.
So he introduced a dynamic twist. The torso is angled one way, but the head is turning back the other way, looking at the viewer. By physically twisting the body, it creates psychological depth. It looks like the person was caught mid-thought or just turned to respond to a conversation. It breathes life into the canvas.
And then, of course, there's sfumato.
Yes, sfumato. It literally translates to, like, smoke. He completely abandoned the hard, rigid outlines that other painters use to separate a figure from the background. In the real world, there are no black lines outlining our faces.
Right.
Instead, he created depth by layering ultra-thin, translucent coats of oil paint, sometimes applying up to 30 microscopic layers on a single cheekbone. Light passes through those layers and bounces back, which is what gives his subjects that living, breathing, almost atmospheric quality. It's the absolute secret behind the Mona Lisa.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about how groundbreaking the technique is for art historians.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be real. Art history alone doesn't explain why 80% of the millions of tourists at the Louvre crowd around that specific painting every year. There has to be more to the Mona Lisa obsession than just blended paint.
You're exactly right, and it is the greatest irony of his legacy. The technique makes it a masterpiece, but the technique does not explain the global fame. For centuries, the Mona Lisa was just another beautiful painting on the wall at the Louvre. It was respected, but most people walked right past it. It wasn't a global icon until it was stolen.
The Great Heist of 1911.
Yes.
And this wasn't some high-tech laser grid museum robbery. A guy named Vincenzo Peruggia, who had actually worked at the Louvre helping build protective glass cases, decides he's going to steal it. He literally just hides in a broom closet overnight.
It's so low-tech.
He waits for the museum to close, pops out, takes the painting off the wall, hides it under his worker's smock, and just walks out the front door the next morning.
And the security was so lax they didn't even realize it was missing for an entire day. They thought the museum photographers had taken it down, and it remained missing for 2 full years.
The police were running in circles. They were so desperate they even interrogated Pablo Picasso as a suspect.
Which is just a crazy historical crossover.
But it was the media that created the legend we know today. Because the painting was missing, newspapers all over the world printed its image on the front page every single week. Have you seen this enigmatic smile? Where is the Mona Lisa?
The global media circus created a vacuum of curiosity. Everyone suddenly needed to know what this stolen painting looked like. By the time Peruggia was finally caught trying to sell it to an art dealer in Florence 2 years later, the Mona Lisa wasn't just a painting anymore. It was the most famous image on planet Earth.
We attribute her fame to his untouchable genius, but it was really just a massive 20th century PR bump from a guy hiding in a closet.
Pretty much.
Which brings us back to the human element of Leonardo himself. Because he wasn't an untouchable god of intellect. When you read the source texts, you see a man who really struggled.
He was deeply, profoundly human. His notebooks reveal intense bouts of depression and self-doubt. He wrote a line that is incredibly haunting when you consider everything he failed to publish. He wrote, "Thinking I was learning to live, I was learning to die." Yeah, he was constantly wrestling with the passage of time, his distractions, and his own unfulfilled ambitions.
And he is so remarkably relatable in the mundane moments, too. At the very end of his life, he's living in France, comfortably supported by the French king. He's writing in his final notebook, right in the middle of this incredibly dense, complex geometrical equation. And he just abruptly stops writing the math and scribbles in the margin. The soup is getting cold.
It is the perfect encapsulation of his entire existence. The mind is soaring among the stars, wrestling with the infinite geometries of the universe, but the physical body is anchored to the very human reality of a bowl of soup waiting on the table.
So if you're looking for a takeaway from all these timelines and translated text, Leonardo wasn't just born a genius. His superpower wasn't magic. It was a relentless, childlike curiosity. He just refused to stop asking why. He looked at a rotting lizard, a theater prop, a human heart, and the flow of a river, and he saw the exact same interconnected universe.
He reminds us that the pursuit of genuine knowledge is messy. It's full of distractions, unfinished projects, and deep contradictions. But that friction is exactly where true brilliance lives.
Which leaves us with one final mystery for the material for you to ponder on your own. On April 23, 1519, just days before he died, Leonardo dictated an incredibly meticulous legal will. He micromanaged every single detail of his departure from this world.
Down to the exact number of poor people, 60, who would be paid to carry torches at his funeral, and precisely how many pounds of wax the local churches would receive in his honor.
He left his manuscripts, his tools, and his thousands of anatomical notes to his loyal student and heir, Francesco Melzi. He accounted for absolutely everything. Yet, in this obsessively detailed, legally binding document, there was mysteriously no mention of his paintings.
No.
Not a single word. So what does that say about how the man we call the greatest painter in history ultimately viewed his own art? Was the framed, static masterpiece just a distraction from his real work? Or did he realize at the very end that his true legacy wasn't what he painted on a canvas, but the questions he dared to ask?